An Indianapolis man is sentenced to 105 years in prison after pleading guilty to murdering his disabled grandfather in 2011.
News 18's Elizabeth Rentschler was at Richard Fouts' sentencing today and has more on what Fouts had to say to his family in attendance. Elizabeth.
Yeah, Jeff and Gina, he actually had a lot to say. In fact, at one point, he was actually yelling at the people in the courtroom, saying he was showing responsibility by admitting the fact that he murdered his grandfather. Fouts stressed the fact that he knew he had done wrong, but that's something his family members say they have known for a long time. And many say today was the last day they hope to ever see him again.
I do love him. He's my brother. He'll always be my brother.
I love you. That's what Curtis Fouts wrote in a letter to his brother Richard as he awaited his fate. On Monday, 39-year-old Richard Fouts was sentenced to a total of 105 years in prison for charges stemming from the murder of his disabled grandfather, 84-year-old William Hartleb. But Curtis says what is most important was what came at the end of the letter.
I also said at the end of the letter that God needs to have mercy on his soul because he will die in prison, and he chose that himself.
It all started in Lafayette back in October of 2011. Tippecanoe County Prosecutor Pat Harrington says Richard went to his grandfather's house to rob him. When he realized his grandfather had no money, Harrington says Richard strangled him and slit his throat. Harrington calls this particular murder a tragedy.
He not only killed and basically executed an elderly gentleman who was well known to his neighbors and loved, but he was disabled and he was his own grandfather.
On Monday, Richard took the stand for the final time, saying he knew he had done wrong, even calling himself a worthless piece of garbage. Richard begged the court to think of his 4-year-old daughter, who he may never see again, and asked the court to consider less than the maximum sentence. But he was given just 15 years less.
Given the defendant's current age, even with credit time for serving, the likelihood of him ever walking free is minimal.
And that's something many members of Fouts' family say they can live with. 2 years later, many of them are still trying to understand how a member of their own flesh and blood could murder someone they all loved so dearly. But for many like Curtis, there is one thing they know for sure.
I never want to talk to him again.
Fouts' 105-year sentence breaks down like this: 65 years for murder, 20 years for attempted burglary, and 20 years for being a habitual offender. To read a copy of the letter written to Richard by his brother and cousin, head to our website at WLFI.com. Elizabeth Rentschler, News 18.